Winter is coming. Today's video is sponsored by Eris Heating Apparel. Winter is coming and there's a lot of prep to do around the homestead. For the geothermal greenhouse here, I need to connect the geothermal. It hasn't been running all summer just because it really hasn't needed it necessarily, but it does keep about a 30-degree buffer all winter long. So I need to set up a 12-volt system that will simply power the PC fan, hopefully 24/7. That'll really help take the edge off in here. At the beginning of spring, I came through and put down a nice thick layer of new compost and soil to help insulate everything. And now that it's about winter, I'm going to come through and do that again, and that'll insulate the roots from the frost. Having 600 gallons of water in here roughly, that's a huge battery, and all day long it absorbs heat, and then all night long it lets heat out. I've had this thing running for years, and it's never had more than a thin layer of ice across the top, and then it thaws out quickly as the day begins. I've got about 20 bluegill fish in the tank here. I figured I'd share a little feeding session with you. They're not too active because the water flow had just stopped, and so they're being careful and cautious before they approach the food. But these bluegill should have no problem all winter long in the aquaponic system. Now that it's dropping down into the 50s, I thought that I'd give one of these heated vests a try. I've been wanting to try one of these for years. This one is the Eris Heated Apparel. This is a vest. It comes with extendable sides here. You can see there are some buttons up here, and in this pocket you would be able to plug in something to charge here, I believe, and on this side there's a battery bank. So I can already feel this heating up. There's heat on the chest, heat in the pockets, heat in the low back. Wow. So you might be able to tell it's about 5:30 in the morning. Much colder outside, you know. Yesterday was 88. This morning is in the 50s. The variance, you know, the difference is big. And it's not super cold outside, but it's a lot colder than it was. And it's nice to have warm clothes on cold mornings. If you live in Arizona like I do, there's a lot of the year that's 50 degrees in the morning and then closer to 90 in the afternoon. So you can see the color on these buttons that indicate how hot each one of the sections are. So if there's one section that you want to be cooler than another, you can change it. There's the storage pocket, and you can zip it closed so you don't accidentally slide your hand into it. And that way it's easy to find where your pocket is without looking. And you know, both materials, inside and out, are soft and the kind of material that you'd expect to maintain warmth. I want to say thanks to Eris for sponsoring the video and helping me prepare for winter by providing some warm clothes to the homestead. So check out the links below if you want to support me and Eris. I don't even have my Russian stove finished yet, which will burn wood. I do, however, have 2 heat pumps and a solar system large enough to power them 24/7, 365. So I have all the heat I would ever need, plus propane as a backup. But I'm probably going to go out to one of the forests that allow permits for cutting wood, and I'll start to cut a few cords of wood. I'll have them on hand, ready to go. And if I harvest a bunch of dry wood, then it'll be ready sooner than green wood. Of course, this greenhouse could use some more compost to keep the root system happy. I keep a large bale of alfalfa and another bale, usually like triticale or some other sort of grass that's cheaper, and it's plenty fine for the horses and whatnot all summer especially, but the alfalfa will keep them a little warmer. So maybe I'll just do 2 bales of alfalfa. You keep those things in mind to keep your animals warm throughout the winter. I can make sure to look over these livestock. There's these stables for the for the pigs, and then these ones for the horses. Just button them up and make sure if air can't get through, they're going to be a lot warmer. If you've got gaps where air can get in, that's a problem. One benefit to having underground cisterns is they never freeze, and having a water tower, it constantly is in the sun, and so it pretty well will never freeze. Now, if you've got containers like that on the north side of your buildings, they might freeze a few days a year in the high desert where I'm at. So I've always kept a tank of diesel and gasoline on hand, and that's because in the camper van I had a diesel heater, and once I built the cabin and the shop, they had diesel heaters in them, and that was a cheap way to heat. But I probably won't be using them that much with the heat pumps now. However, it's another redundancy, and having that fuel on hand and some extra heaters is just a good thing to have a backup. Why am I thinking about winter 3 months before it's really going to get cold? Because it takes that long to prepare for winter. You can see that some of these panels are not even cut. I need to throw the roof on that stable and close all of this in just to make it that much more comfortable for the horses, and that's going to take time, and so preparing now is the only way I'm going to get it done. I like to keep a real neat homestead, so these are building supplies, that's why they're there. And then this is trash, and I haul anything out to the dump that is trash. That would be gone, but my trailer's down, so another thing I probably better check off is I need new leaf springs for that trailer, so I can put that axle back on. Then I can load it up with all this crap and get it off of the homestead before it gets covered in snow and stuff. By running the hose underground, this will usually not freeze, and I can pump water over here, but I always keep a backup hose that's not frozen, and that way I can move water around the homestead at any time. Of course, there's a better way. Of course it'd be better to pipe, plumbing underneath the ground around the entire homestead, but that's going to cost a lot of money and take a lot of trenching, so it'll happen eventually. But until then, having that ran underground helps, and then having the backup hose that's always in the shop empty where it can't freeze. That way I can guarantee that I move water anywhere on the homestead I need to. In addition to putting down compost to keep the root systems warm in the gardens, I also wrap the entire greenhouses in plant fabric. Well, the greenhouse I wrap in plant fabric, and the geothermal has these strings ran across above the gardens, so I can just throw the plant fabric over top like a tent. And that each layer is like another 10 degrees, so it makes a huge difference. Another thing to keep in mind is get your blankets ready, because especially in the high desert, it can be really warm, but then it can be so uncomfortably cold at night. And if you don't have a blanket ready that you can just access quickly, you might just sit there uncomfortable all night, without that additional blanket. When you build something like the cabin that I have here, a lot of people have complained that I have this foam in the corners. And the truth is I just haven't got around to cutting it out yet. But the foam that'll be left behind and the foam that's currently there is magnificent, because what it does is it prevents air exchange from outside to inside, and it makes it a lot easier to maintain temperature inside. That applies to your camper van or your cabin or your house. That's a huge overlooked piece of insulation. Redundancy, 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 guys. If one system for heat fails, you've got to have a backup. You could die without it, especially if you live in the wilderness like I do. So I've got propane for heat. I've got, the wood stove soon for heat. I've got the heat pumps for heat. I have diesel heaters for heat. I have lots of wool blankets and backups just in case that's the only way I could heat myself. And that applies to everything around the homestead.